Hello, everyone. Jack here with a video to update you on what took place last night here at Gilfillan Memorial Church. We had the first of our new Wineskins meetings, and I had said to folks who weren't able to be there last night that I would record it and make the video available for you. Well, sure enough, when I got to the end of the meeting and went to the camera to see what had recorded, it turned out that nothing had recorded. So what I decided to do today was to just record myself sitting here in the vestry, offering you the presentation that I gave last night to folks as we gathered to have the first of what we hope will be many fruitful conversations about the future of Gilfillan Memorial Church. Is really an invitation to the larger church to become part of conversations that have already been happening in the church leadership at the joint board who've been thinking and praying about what God is doing in our midst and who God is calling us to be moving forward into the future. And we're calling these meetings new wineskins because of the teaching of Jesus, the illustration that he himself used when he said, you don't pour new wine into old wineskins the way they kept wine back then because the old wineskins would burst if you tried to do that. And it's really an image of, when God is doing something new, you need new vessels, you need new ways of thinking, new ways of doing things to move that forward. And that's really what we're all about here. As we think about the future, we're asking what new wine is God pouring out through the ministry of Gilfillan, and what new wineskins do we need for that? And I said last night, I'll say again here, the purpose of these meetings is going to be to listen together, to talk together, to have conversation, to pray together. But for this first meeting, it's a little more presentational because I'm catching you up, as it were, on conversations that have already been taking place with the managers, with the session and the joint board. So this first meeting is a little more me talking than I would like, and maybe you would like. But it's just an opportunity to fill you in on what we've been talking about. And as we've been talking about these things in the joint board, we've called them vitality conversations because that's ultimately what we're talking about. We're talking about the vitality of our church. Now, I'm going to invite you to do the same thing I invited the folks who were here last night to do, and that's to take a moment and just think about that. What does it mean? What does vitality mean? When you hear the phrase vitality of our church, what comes to your mind? Just consider that. What does church vitality mean to you? Now, I'm willing to bet, with the group last night and with you out there online as well, if we were to go to all of you and ask you to share your answers, we would probably hear a few different things, but in the end, they would probably have a similar theme. We might use, slightly different language. Some people might talk about church growth. Others might put it in terms of community impact, outreach, and evangelism. Still, others might think about specific programs, youth ministry, children's ministry, Bible study, stuff like that. Some people, when they think about church vitality, really focus in on sustainability in terms of like church leadership or budget. And all of those are good. All of those are great. All of those are important. All of those are components of vitality. But one of the things that I'm hoping to give to you in this first meeting is some common language we can use as we talk about these things moving forward. And the first thing I would offer to you is this: church vitality isn't just about growth. It's not just about evangelism or just about attendance or leadership or finances. All those things are part of vitality, but they're not vitality itself. At its core, church vitality is about health. It's about having a healthy church that is capable of adapting to a changing world in a way that makes God's kingdom visible in new and exciting ways. And here's an important point I want you to consider. You don't have to be a huge church to do that. There are small churches that are incredibly healthy and fruitful. On the flip side, there are large churches that are incredibly unhealthy and unfruitful because health isn't about size or numbers or programs or budgets. All of those things can be indicators of health. But I believe church health is ultimately about one thing. It's about pursuing Christ. A healthy church is a church that is passionately pursuing Jesus, growing in faith, growing in trust, growing in obedience, growing in discernment and listening, and nimble enough and passionate enough to respond to whatever they're hearing from the Spirit. And I especially love that word nimble. It makes me think of a football pitch, right? Either American football or European football doesn't matter because in both sports, you all see people, players who just have that gift of being nimble. They can just turn on a dime, right? And go where they need to be, where the action is taking place. That's an image of for us in the church to be nimble, to hear what God is saying. Hey, the action's over here, head that way, and to do it with passion and excitement. Now, a fundamental belief in church vitality is that God has a desire for every church. God has a plan and a vision for what that church can be. Our goal is to walk so closely with Jesus that his plan and vision become part of our own spiritual DNA. There's an old saying that's attributed to Jewish tradition that you may have heard before. It's a good one for us where we are in this presentation. The saying is, may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. The idea was back then that as a follower of a rabbi, and there were lots of them back in Jesus' day, these itinerant teachers who would wander around the countryside, they had followers who would go with them, just like Jesus and his disciples. The idea was that as you followed your rabbi, you would walk so close to them that the dust kicked up by their feet would cover you. To be covered in the dust of your rabbi would show your devotion and show how passionately you were listening to everything they had to say. And that's an image of health for us as a church. Walking so closely to Jesus that who he is and what he desires becomes part of us, covered in the dust of our rabbi. Unfortunately, what often happens in church life is that being the church sometimes gets in the way of being disciples. Churches over the years can get stuck. We have ways of understanding things and doing things that become rooted so deep that we're no longer able to hear what the rabbi is calling us to do. And I'm not just offering this as a diagnosis of Gilfillan Memorial Church. I'm saying that every single church struggles with this. Otherwise, you wouldn't see cartoons like this one. This is a church pastoral search committee meeting with a prospective pastor and read what they're saying. They want the right thing. They want transformation, but they're not willing to face the cost of that, the change that would be necessary. They're stuck. And here's the thing, friends. We are at a point in history where it is more important than ever to pursue health in our churches. For so many decades, for so many centuries, really. And maybe you remember this from your own life in the past. For many years, it was just assumed that the church was a central part of society, an important part of the culture. The church was central to the life of the community, even the nation. That's no longer the case. Let me share with you some statistics, and I don't share these to scare you, but just to give you a picture of the challenges we have being the church in the 21st century. And the first one comes from the 2022 Scottish census, where for the first time ever, a majority of people responded that they had no religion at all. 51.1%. First time in history that the majority of Scots identified as non-religious. And I would think that that number has probably gone up in the 4 years since this census. Also, church attendance in Scotland is down 60% since 1980. Only 7% of Scots now report attending a church on a given Sunday. 7%. Also noticeable in recent polls and surveys is the aging of the Christian church here in Scotland. In the most recent data, it showed that 42% of church memberships in Scotland were age 65 or higher. 42% of the membership, 65 or higher. That is double the proportion in the culture as a whole. And what's important too, when you analyze all this data together, what you find is that the younger the group you're looking at, the more likely they are to not attend church, the more likely they are to not consider themselves religious. Part of the survival of churches is dependent on up and coming generations who will take up the call and continue to work. But so many right now in those up and coming generations want nothing to do with the church, with Christianity. In a nutshell, churches are dying. We see that all the time right now with church buildings closing and congregations merging, sometimes in stressful and divisive ways. And again, I'm not saying this to scare you, but to say how incredibly important it is for churches right now to do some serious thinking and praying about who we are and who we will be moving forward. Now, before I go on, let me just offer you one word of hope in the midst of all this, some historically based hope. This isn't the first time we've seen these kinds of trends in our culture. There's kind of a cyclical nature to all of this. I studied American history when I was at university and American religious history when I was in graduate school. And I was fascinated with the period of the 18th century, the 1700s in the States. And if you know that the 1700s, that was the time of the Enlightenment, right? This sudden explosion of scientific understanding and knowledge, and really unreal, unseen until that time. And one of the things you heard, one of the mantras almost that was coming out of the Enlightenment was, "Oh, you know what? This is going to kill religion. We've proven we don't need it. We are advancing in all of our scientific knowledge. We've shown that religion is worthless. Religion's dead." But right at the same time the Enlightenment is happening, right as it's kind of reaching its peak, there's something that takes place in the States, but also here in Europe, called the First Great Awakening, which was a revival, a renewal of religious faith and devotion. And there have been cycles like that through history. So I offer that just to say this isn't an indicator that it's always going to be like this. I'm always hopeful and I'm always praying that God will bring that kind of renewal and revival. But here's the thing, we can't just sit around and wait for it. God will do it in his way, in his time. But again, our task is to just think and pray about who we are in the now and who we will be moving forward. And in my opinion, too many churches, too many churches approach this whole thing with kind of a business mindset, thinking it can be solved with marketing and new programs and maybe a little flash and pizzazz, right? And I've seen this in my own life. I'll tell you just a quick story here from when Sharon and I were living in Michigan. We originally moved to Michigan from England um, when I was offered a position as the associate pastor at a fairly good-sized church in Western Michigan. I was the associate pastor, maybe 1,000 members or so. And one of my duties one of the things, my responsibilities was on Sunday mornings before worship, I would stand out in the vestibule area near the doors and I would greet people. And I'd say, "Welcome to our church. Great to have you." Show them where the sanctuary is, anything they needed to know. And if they were new, to kind of get to know them a little bit. And there was this period of time after I'd been there a year or so, where over a course of 3 or 4 Sundays, there was a recurring theme, a recurring pattern, where someone would come through the door that I didn't recognize, and I'd go up to them and I'd say, "Oh, hi, welcome. It's great to have you. I'm Jack. I'm the associate pastor." And they would offer their names and they'd say, "We're so and so," and then they'd pause maybe for a moment, and then they'd say, they'd just look at me and they'd say, "We're from Redeemer." And I knew that Redeemer Church was one of our sister churches from the same denomination, about down the road about 25 minutes away. And it happened enough times, and when they would say it, they say, "We're from Redeemer." There was almost this kind of understanding that I would know what that meant, that there was some level to that underneath it all that I would connect with, but I didn't. I didn't really know what was going on. I didn't know until a few weeks later when I was called down to our senior pastor's office. Steve, lovely guy, wonderful guy, and I miss him dearly. He's back in retired now in Michigan. Um, and I go into his office, and there are a group of people that I didn't recognize. And it turned out that this was the leadership team from Redeemer. And I started to hear what had been going on, that there had been tension and frustration and problems, relational problems in the church, which had led to this kind of trickle out of the door, which is what I was experiencing at our church as they trickled in to our place. There'd been kind of an exodus, and it led to a pastoral departure, a very sudden pastoral departure, where he preached a sermon on Sunday, packed up his office, and moved out on Monday, without really telling anyone. And things were just collapsing. And I remember sitting there listening to their story, and at one point, one of them, very emotional, it was very hard to hear. One of the members of their leadership team said, "We don't even know who's preaching at our church this coming Sunday." And Steve, our senior pastor, looked at me and he said, "So Jack, what are you doing on Sunday?" And I said, "Well, I guess I'm preaching at Redeemer." So I did. I went down that next Sunday and I preached, and more or less, I stayed. I never left. There was something that happened in going down there. My heart was captured by these folks, and there was just a real sense of God saying, "Jack, here's where I want you to be." It wasn't an easy thing to do, kind of transitioning from one to the other. And some hiccups along the way, but God made it happen. And Sharon and I both ended up on staff at Redeemer. Uh, and one of the things that took place as we kind of started ministry there, and they had gone down, it'd been like 200 and some odd members, and it was down to maybe 50 on 50 active members. Um, and there were some folks who came in to be alongside us as we met with the church leadership at Redeemer. Some people there to kind of consult and to help us. Um, and God bless them, I don't fault them. They were really strong, kind of entrepreneurial business types, CEO types, um, and they immediately had all these ideas of the things we needed to do to get Redeemer going again, right? So it was, you need a vacation Bible school, and you need to find a new children's ministry director and a youth ministry director. You need to get the children's program, the youth program up and running. You need to get all these programs. You need to renovate all these programs and get them up and running, and that'll put you on the right track. And as we sat there listening to this, Sharon and I and the leadership of Redeemer just felt something completely different. What we felt was that it was time at this moment to just stop everything, and we did. We shut down all the programs of the church apart from Sunday morning worship. And all we did was we had Sunday morning worship, and then we had meetings where we would pray and we would listen and just basically say to God, We know you have a future for this place. We need you to show us what it is. Um, and again, I share this just as a way of illustrating that facing the challenges of the future, the challenges that we see in the statistics I just shared with you, it's not a quick fix, and it's not about new programs and something that you layer onto everything. There needs to be a different kind of intentionality here, and I just want to say I'm not proposing we do the exact same thing here at Gilfillan. We don't need to stop everything we're doing, but we do need to be very intentional about praying and listening. I believe God is not through with this church, but we do face some very real challenges. And let me give you some language to think about those challenges. In the language of church vitality, congregations are usually slotted into one of four categories. Let me share these with you briefly. The categories are healthy church, stable church, critical moment church, and at risk church. And let me walk through these for you real quick. In a healthy church, the vital signs are strong. People are coming to faith. The presence of God is palpable. There's a real difference being made in their community. There's a real sense of forward momentum. And most importantly, it's all done in a posture of openness and excitedness and receptivity to what God is doing in their midst. There's an openness to change and new things that's just vibrant and life-giving. That's a healthy church. And a stable church, the vital signs are steady. There's real love and care for each other. There's prayer, there's worship, there's strong community. It's safe and it's comfortable. God is definitely at work, but the energy of the church is geared more for sustaining what's currently happening than it is looking ahead to see what might be coming down the road. In fact, there's often resistance to change because, hey, after all, things seem to be working just fine the way they are. That's what it means to be stable. Then there's the critical moment church. In a critical moment church, the vital signs are starting to weaken, maybe due to external factors, maybe internal, probably a combination of both. And there are good things that happen in a critical moment church. There's lovely worship and moments of vibrant community and connection, but they're offset by levels of frustration, maybe a bit of fear of the future. There's a very real sense that unless some things change, the future of the church could be at threat. There's great desire for health, but no one's really sure how we get there. It's a mix of excitement and uncertainty. That's a critical moment congregation. Then then there's the at-risk church, and this is the church that's just barely holding on. The vital signs are weak. There's no sense of common vision or unity. There's anger and grief and sadness that's pervasive. And there's no real vision for what the church could be moving forward. In an at-risk church, there's often a lot of living in the glory days, right? Remember back when so and so was in charge and such was happening, and we were such a well-known and respected church in our community. So busy looking back that there's no real passion for looking forward, no energy or desire for change. There's almost a sense of why even bother? So there's the four categories. Now, chances are, as you've been listening to these descriptions, you've been thinking about where you might slot Gilfillan Memorial Church. Are we healthy? Are we stable? Are we at a critical moment? Are we at risk? And let me just say that it's hard sometimes to nail this down because in every church at times you can see elements of all of these. The question is, which one in general best captures the energy of our conversations, the tenor of our interactions, the heartbeat of our situation? And I'm going to tell you where I fall on this, what I see. You may disagree with me, and that's perfectly okay. And if you want, I'd love to get together with you over a cup of coffee and we can talk about that. But I personally believe where Gilfillan falls is critical moment. But let me follow that immediately by saying this is not a bad thing. Because in church vitality circles, the understanding is that if you're not a fully healthy church, critical moment is kind of where you want to be. Because a stable church is kind of blind to the need for change. They think they can just go on exactly as they are from now until Jesus comes back. They don't feel a hunger for anything else. It's stagnant. It's so hard to move from stable to healthy because people just don't feel the need. It's also hard to move from at risk to healthy, not because they don't feel the need, but because they don't feel the hope. The at risk church has pretty much given up. There's just so much grief and anger and frustration, and there's just no hope left. The future seems a complete dead end. And in fact, a majority of at risk churches, from my experience and research, a majority of at risk churches quite simply don't make it. But here's something interesting. Churches that do make it, churches that move from stable to healthy, or those rare ones that are able to move from at risk to healthy, most of them, if not all of them, actually first pass through critical moment, usually precipitated by some sort of crisis that wakes them up. Holy cow, something's wrong. We need to change. That's what Sharon and I experienced at our church in Michigan. They had been a very stable church. Everything looked great on the outside. But then, a pastoral departure, a church split, awakened them to the need for change. So they went from stable to critical moment. And here's the thing, being a critical moment church is actually a very beautiful place to be. Because in a critical moment, there is very tender openness to what God might do. Let me share with you a story from scripture that illustrates this really well. It comes from the Old Testament book of Second Chronicles, and it tells of a time when there's this great army that's descending on God's people. Three different nations join forces to attack Jerusalem. It is a perilous time for the Hebrew people. It is a critical moment. And what does the king do? King Jehoshaphat? I love this. He calls a prayer meeting. He calls people from every town to gather at the temple in Jerusalem. And then we read this. Jehoshaphat stood in the assembly of Judah and Jerusalem in the house of the Lord before the new court and said, O Lord, God of our ancestors, are you not God in heaven? Do you not rule over all the kingdoms of the nations? In your hand are power and might, so that no one is able to withstand you. Did you not, O our God, drive out the inhabitants of this land before your people Israel and give it forever to the descendants of your friend Abraham? They have lived in it, and in it have built you a sanctuary for your name, saying, if disaster comes upon us, the sword, judgment, or pestilence, or famine, we will stand before this house and before you, for your name is in this house, and cry to you in our distress, and you will hear and save. See now the people of Ammon, Moab, and Mount Seir, whom you would not let Israel invade when they came from the land of Egypt, and whom they avoided and did not destroy. They reward us by coming to drive us out of your possession that you have given us to inherit. O our God, will you not execute judgment upon them? For we are powerless against this great multitude that is coming against us. We do not know what to do, but our eyes are on you. We don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. That is the posture of a critical moment, where we know that we're facing perilous times, and we also know that nothing in our own cleverness or wisdom will suffice to move us into something new. Only the guidance and empowering of God will do that. And here's the thing, our conversations, about vitality at the joint board, and also just in general conversations that I've had around the church. They all have this very strong awareness that God is up to something at Gilfillan Memorial Church. There's a palpable sense of God's spirit moving. I mean, look, just look at the people God has brought into our midst. Look at the energy and excitement around things like the concert Duncan Robertson put together. Look at the continuing impact from our ministries through each week, the mums and toddlers group, the Friday drop in. There's a very real sense that God is at work here. We are not stagnant. We are open to what God is doing. Neither are we at risk. We haven't given up hope, but we are at a critical moment. In large part because of some of the forces I've already mentioned, the growing secularization, sorry, of our culture, the aging of our congregation. Add to that the very real physical needs of an aging building. I mean, this place is almost 150 years old. If you think about it, it's actually in pretty good shape for 150, but it still needs work. And that's one of the reasons we believe that now is the time to have intentional, prayerful conversations about the future. Who is God calling us to be? What is God calling us to do? And the beautiful thing about this is that He's ready and willing to let us know. He doesn't leave us in the dark to figure it out. God wants to guide His people. What He asks of us is simply to draw near, to listen, to be covered in the dust of our rabbi. That's what these new wineskin meetings are about. That's what the new wineskin sermon series that begins this Sunday is all about. It's about listening to God and discerning what He is saying about the future. But let me say something important here. This isn't about making a wholesale change. I've seen that in churches before, and it almost ends always in disaster. Almost always. They decide they need to wipe everything away and start new. They change their name, they change their worship style, they change the sanctuary, they add all sorts of bells and whistles. I specifically mentioned last night fog machines, smoke machines. For some reason, that's a really big thing. And definitely in the States right now. I don't know so much in the UK, but you go to a worship service and it feels more like a rock concert, with the dark lights and the smoke and the fog on the stage. And last night, I said pretty strongly, I'll say it again here pretty strongly, we will never have a fog machine in Sunday worship at Gilfillan Memorial Church. Those kinds of bells and whistles are not the way to go because that isn't vitality. Actually, that's what that is. That's panic mode. We don't want to panic. We want to listen. And here's the thing, one of the ways that God speaks to us in all of this is through His people. That's why in churches that undergo a vitality journey, there tend to be quite a few listening sessions, times of just getting together and listening to what people are sensing and hearing themselves, what they're noticing themselves. That's what these meetings are about. We're hoping to have them on a fairly regular basis. We're still figuring out just how regular. I don't know if it would be quarterly, monthly, something like that. But we want to get together and see what people are sensing and hearing and noticing. In fact, last night I gave the 15 or 20 people that were gathered here last night a couple questions to start us off in that. And I'm going to show you the same questions. Last night we had some great conversation around them. As I share the questions with you here on video, I'm encourage you to think about it. And if something comes to your mind that you'd like to share, send it to me. Send an email, jackbrown@gilfillanmemorial.church. If you have a notebook or a journal or something nearby, you can just jot that down. Send it to me. I'd love to hear what you sense. Because here are the two questions. The first one that I asked people to think about was this: in what ways do you sense God is at work in our church? What have you noticed? Where have you seen God moving here at Gilfillan? Think about that. What have you seen? What have you noticed? Where has God been present? And again, if something comes to your heart, your mind, and you'd like to share it, please, please, please let me know. And then last night I offered a follow-up question. Again, take a few moments to think about this. If you need to pause the video on these and just think and pray about them, go by all means do that. Here was the second question. Based on how you've seen God at work in our church, what gifts do you see in our midst that we can offer to him for what he might do in the future? In other words, what strengths are already there that God might want to build upon? Because here's one of the things that I've seen quite often. Um, we call these new wineskins, and we believe God is doing new things, but so often, um, like I said, it's not wholesale change. It's not a complete reversal and a complete reinvention. I've rarely seen that work well in churches. What more often seems to happen is that God offers new things that have very strong links to the existing DNA of the church. I'll give you an example. We've had a few concerts here lately with a rock choir and Duncan Robertson's tribute to his parents that he put together. And those have been fantastic, and I hope to build on that. Um, what some people don't know is that that's the heritage of this place. That goes back to the turn of the 20th century when this place was a concert venue for a lot of different types of groups and choirs and musical ensembles and things like that. So often when we are looking for the new wine and praying about the new wineskins, we find, I guess maybe to stretch the analogy a little bit, it's new wine, but it's being made from the same vineyards. Does that make sense? So that's the question. And what strengths, what things are already in our church that God might want to build upon? So think about that. What do you see in our midst that we can offer prayerfully to God and see what he might do with it? Again, if something comes to your heart, your mind, by all means, let me know. And we'll add that into our conversations moving forward. I've already kind of given a hint on one of the here on one of the things that comes to my mind about this specific question of what do we see that we can offer, and that has to do with our building. I don't believe we are a city center church by accident. We are perfectly situated to have an impact in the city of Dundee. Like I said, we already see that in our weekly ministries, like the Mums and Toddlers group, the Friday drop-in. We've seen it in these concerts. And one of the specific things about that is that we hear over and over again is the acoustics of our sanctuary are amazing. We've been hearing that we've been here 4 years. Shortly after we moved here, we had friends coming from the States to visit, and they were musicians, they were worship leaders in their churches. We took them into this church and took them in the sanctuary, and boom, oh my word, the acoustics in here are amazing, and that's proven to be true. It played out again just a week or two ago. I don't know how many of you know this, but we actually had some professional recording sessions taking place in our sanctuary. A fairly well-known folk music duo, Nordic folk music, came and recorded music with a professional engineer that I've gotten to know through theater groups. And he was kind enough to post on Facebook afterwards, just had an amazing couple days in the wonderful acoustics of Gilfillan Memorial Church. There's something there I think that we can build on and open our doors to let people in. Just yesterday, I had a phone call uh, from someone in the NHS looking for a place to host a dementia cafe fortnightly, to invite folks who are struggling with dementia to come and be cared for and supported. Wouldn't it be wonderful if we can help them make that happen? The reality is we have an amazing resource here. That's one of the things that comes to my mind, just in terms of what we are offering to God, saying, you know, use it as you will. And as we've talked about this in the joint board, it's one of the things that's come up as an important piece of our journey forward. It's one of the new wineskins, if you will, but even though it's 150 years old. Another example of this, one of the things that's come about with that vision is part of the work Cynthia has been doing as our artist in residence. Last night, she shared a bit about the Scriptoria conference that's happening here at the church in July, where we're going to have, I think, about 45 uh, Christian authors from around the world are going to come and they're going to have a conference together where they're going to be encouraged, they're going to offer feedback to one another. And it's just this is just a perfect space for something like that. And I'm very thankful to Cynthia for bringing it here. And that's just a model. Last night, I called it a sneak peek of the future because, we can offer this church to Christians. We can offer retreat. We can offer discipleship resources. We can bring them in. I have a vision. I would love to do retreats and for people in ministry, for pastors and worship leaders and people like that to just come and to just breathe. Just breathe in the presence of God through worship and through retreat presentations and things. Um, so all this stuff with the building is just one facet of how we sense God stirring and calling us. But friends, it's only the beginning. And continuing to move forward is really all about prayer and discernment. And that was kind of the final invitation I had in this presentation, where I asked the folks last night, and now I'm asking you through video. I'm asking if you we willing to commit to praying over three specific things for our church. The first is discernment for our church leadership. Just pray for the elders and the managers as we think about the future and what God is calling us to do and be. The second thing is to pray for fruitful conversations in the larger church. So, like these new wineskin meetings, but also just kind of casual conversations that just pick up. Just pray that they would be spirit filled and fruitful, moving us forward. And then the third prayer request is prayer for you, prayer for how God might call you to be involved. That could be involvement in the church, just involvement in one of the ministries of the church, an existing ministry, a new ministry that might come together, or maybe specifically, God might call you to have a part to play in this new wineskins journey. One of the things we're hoping to do is to put together a new wineskins team that would just meet on a more regular basis than these listening sessions. And it can be a Zoom meeting. It doesn't have to be in person every time. But let's just chat and pray. Chat about ministry, chat about life, chat about what God seems to be doing. Share what conversations they're having with other people and pray over it all. So you might feel a stirring within you to be part of that, to be part of the new wineskins team that we're putting together. Again, if that's something you'd be interested in, by all means, send me an email and let's go grab a cup of coffee or an iron brew or something and talk about it. But that is pretty much everything I shared last night. And as I think I said earlier, along with this video, the fact that you're watching this means that there's a new page on our church website dedicated to church vitality and new wineskins. And you should see both this video and also you can download the PowerPoint. You can also download the handout that I gave people at the end of last night, which was just a summary of some of the things we talked about. Those the reflection questions, and then also the three prayer points. Take it, tuck it in your Bible, put it next to your bed or something, or your chair, and just occasionally pick it up, and it's an invitation to prayer. If you have any questions, comments, thoughts about all this stuff, again, I'm available and eager to talk about it because, guys, I'm excited. I am excited about this place, and I am excited about what the future might hold. Yes, it's filled with challenges. That's the nature of critical moment. But like I said, critical moment's a beautiful place to be because that's where God shows up. And that's where the people of God in that nimble way respond and move quickly into what he has next for us. Um, so my invitation to you, I'm going to give you two final words, and then I'm going to call this video good to go. But here it is. Ready? Get dusty, right? Let's get dusty. Thanks, and we'll see you soon.